Good evening, and welcome to Twilight Tales. Tonight, let yourself drift into the world of Ragnar Lodbrok, the legendary Viking warrior, whose name echoes through the icy mists of the north. His life was a storm of steel, fire, and fate, a saga of conquest whispered by the gods. Get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let this myth carry you gently into the night. Chapter 1. Birth of a Legend. The mists of Fjord, the first timid shimmering glimmers of dawn, barely filtered through the thick mantle of mist that spread like a mystical veil over Fjord. The water, a slate-gray, gently rippled against the hulls of the sleeping Drakkars, and a cold, iodine-laden breeze wove its way between the pines and mossy rocks of the stone quays. The hoarse cry of the seagulls, suspended in the still air, seemed to come from another world, as if the creatures themselves guarded the secret of the shadows intertwined between sky and sea. In the heart of this atmosphere, where time seemed to stretch, Ragnar Lodbrok was born, son of Sigurd Ring, the mighty king of Ringerike, and Alruna, whose blood was said to be forged by ancient mythical kings. The child opened his eyes under the watchful gaze of Ketil Flatnose. This scarred veteran, returned from countless raids in Saxon lands, placed a rough hand on the rune-carved cradle, murmuring an ancient invocation to ward off any evil eye. The ravens, perched on nearby cliffs, croaked as if to herald the advent of an extraordinary destiny. Alruna, clad in a thick woolen cloak adorned with silver threads, brushed her son's forehead, where it was said one could already see the glint of a coming storm. Her cold blue eyes, like polished steel, scanned the world opening before him, while Sigurd, tall and upright, stood back, his features grave, aware that this newborn would one day bear both crown and axe. Around them, in the great long house, embers crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stretched hides lining the walls, mementos of warlike expeditions and feasts celebrating victories. From his first steps, Ragnar displayed an insatiable curiosity. He awoke before dawn, silently making his way to the shore where he loved to touch the icy sand. There, his fingers traced runic symbols taught to him by the seer Gudrun, sinuous shapes, serpents coiled around axes, seals of protection for travel and war. Gudrun, a woman with ebony hair and veiled eyes, lived in seclusion on the heights beyond Vidaclint Cliff. It was she who declared, one stormy evening, "Your name will carve both the brilliance of the blade and the pain of the heart. Though you win 1,000 battles, emptiness will always pursue you." Beyond the pine forest's edge, Björn, the elder brother, kept watch. Calmer and more reflective, he offered Ragnar his thick fur cloak when the wind's bite grew too sharp. Together they built small rafts in the shadow of their father's boats, making the young wood groan under the strain of their clumsy knots, and imagined worlds where they would be absolute masters, sailing across unknown seas. But life in the palace was not Ragnar's only world. Each week, Thora Borgarjort, the blacksmith's daughter, came to help him polish the steel blades Sigurd himself brought back from Frankish forges. Blonde with amber eyes, Thora bound leather strips around the hilts of swords, whispering prayers to the blades so that the blood they spilled would never tarnish honor. By her side, Ragnar learned to feel the vibration of the blade, to listen to the muted song the steel produced when struck precisely against the anvil. Sometimes, Kettle Flatnose took Ragnar and Björn beyond Kattegat's defensive walls to gaze upon the sea. The warrior recounted blazing tales, churches burning on the Saxon coast, the vermilion gleam of blood on white stone walls, the crash of shields shattering like seashells under the thunderous tread of Viking fury. "Never forget, boy," Kettle would say, fixing Ragnar with his elusive gaze. "A raised axe demands the faith of the heart and the steel of courage." As the child grew, carried by the currents of the legend weaving around his birth, the fjord itself seemed to exult with every gust of wind. The seagulls, figures of mischievous gods, soared in sinuous circles, tracing omens in the sky, read like the lines of a palm. And as the mist, a silent accomplice, slowly retreated at sunset, all knew that the day would come, before Ragnar even reached his 16th year, when he would cross the sacred threshold of Hufvidiclint Cliff to receive his ritual tattoo, forever sealing his pact with the gods and the sea. The runes carved on his cradle, the song of the seagulls, Gudrun's voice, and Thora's steel already merged in his destiny. In the air, heavy with iodine and myths, a name whispered on every lip: Ragnar Lodbrok, whose legend was only beginning. The legacy of Nordic kings. At the heart of Ringerike's great hall, the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows on the oak pillars, carved with ancient runes recounting the epic of ancestors. The acrid smell of smoke mingled with the rich scent of animal hides, while the creaking of white-hot wood vibrated like a war chant. On the long, rough-hewn oak table, covered with a tanned leather cloth, rested Sigurd's sword, called Fjorgen Bani, and a helm adorned with horns etched with intertwined serpents. Each piece bore the clan's mark, a sign Ragnar, still a child, was learning to recognize as one reads a prophecy. Sigurd Ring, an indomitable king, had forged his power through timeless battles. It was said that during the famous Battle of Bravelir, his army stood like a bronze wall against the reinforcements of the Swedes and Danes, repelling enemy waves with the fury of storms. The skalds sang of his exploits, praising the strength of his axe swing that cleaved the air like divine lightning, and the endurance of his men, guided by the legend that the king himself wielded a sword given by Odin's hand. It was this same conqueror's blood that flowed in Ragnar's veins, marked from his earliest years by the legacy of his forebears. Alruna, his mother, descended from a lineage as proud as it was mysterious. Daughter of Halfdan the Old, she was said to have a direct blood tie to the Ynglingatal kings, those mythical sovereigns who ruled before the human era, chosen by the gods. In her delicate hands, she held a necklace of blue glass beads brought from Scania, which her grandmother Hildur had received as a gift from a Saxon treasure hunter. Each bead symbolized a bygone era, a forgotten king, and beneath their translucent glow, ancient faces could be glimpsed. In the shadow of this heritage, Ragnar grew, aware of the weight of the generations that preceded him. Each evening, in the shadow of the pillars, the skald Einar Silvertongue recited the family sagas. His deep, resonant voice unfolded verses describing royal unions, pacts sealed in blood, and ceremonies where honey and wool were offered to the Norns. He told of Harald Hildetan's cunning, Vikar the traveler's bravery, and Sigrid the wise's devotion. Ragnar, seated on a wolfskin, drank in each story like sacred oil, steeping his mind with visions of glory and betrayal, of heroes bearing hope and formidable shadows. On the hall's pillars, carvings depicted the intertwined paternal and maternal lineages. Sea serpents coiled around trees of life, hammered by the axes of divine smiths. Ketil Flatnose, loyal warrior and protector of the siblings, guided Ragnar's hand as he traced his first runes on the posts. The bite of the chisel into the wood, the scrape of falling shavings, echoed like a distant reverberation of steel striking an anvil. Each symbol evoked a virtue, Fehu for family wealth, Urus for indomitable strength, Ansus for the wisdom of the gods. In those moments of learning, Björn the elder watched in silence, his gaze filled with restrained pride. He often wore his father's heavy quilted leather armor, recalled lessons in spear handling under lashing rain, and already paved the way for Ragnar. Never jealous, he sometimes shared his childhood treasures, a small engraved gold ring, a pendant shaped like a miniature hammer, tangible reminders of allegiance to Thor. These objects, passed between brothers, sealed a bond that neither blood nor war could break. Thora Borgarjurt was also a key thread in this dynastic tapestry. A smith and metal artist, she crafted ornaments to adorn royal armor. When she etched a runic inscription around a blade, her voice lowered, almost a whisper, as if murmuring a prayer to the spirits of iron. She taught Ragnar the theory of the inner fire that hardens steel and the heart. Give the flame a flawless object, and it will return invincible metal. These words, carried by the scent of glowing charcoal, would forge his resolve. Meanwhile, in her stone and turf hut, the seer Gudrun drew interlocking circles in the sand. Her gaze pierced the darkness. You carry the legacy of kings and gods. But remember, Ragnar, every genius comes with hidden demons. The throne's brilliance attracts the ravens of vengeance. The shadow of the axe breeds fear in hearts. Under the flickering light of a tallow candle, these words instilled in him a new caution, a keen sense of the responsibility tied to his royal blood. Thus, surrounded by fragments of his glorious past, swords, runes, sung legends, and oracular warnings, Ragnar gradually claimed the soul of the Nordic kings. Every polished stone, every worn wood chip, every note of a Viking refrain formed the foundation of his identity. When the sea breeze swept through the hall's doors and the Drakkar's wood resounded on the water, the child felt destiny stir in his veins. Already beyond the legend, he sensed the weight of what he would one day become, no longer a mere heir, but the master of his own kingdom. The child with the stormy gaze. Ragnar's early years unfolded in the vibrant gray light of Nordic mornings, where the air carried the acrid taste of the sea and the distant echo of Drakkar's, awakening to the seagull's song. Already they said of him that he had the stormy gaze. His steel blue eyes, wide and gleaming, seemed to hold all the fury of the Atlantic and the unfathomable depth of the fjords. When he scanned the horizon, his gaze slid along the dark line where sea met sky, as if probing the secrets hidden in the mists. That same gaze would suddenly flare with a fierce glint whenever the winds rose, spraying icy droplets of foam onto his childish cheeks, rolling down like a paradoxical caress. As soon as he could walk, Ragnar preferred the shores to the mossy rugs of the great longhouse. The wind, absolute master of these coasts, was a game to him. He stood facing it, arms outstretched, and laughed as his blond hair whipped the air. Beneath his feet, pebbles polished by the tides slid and bounced, producing a rhythmic hiss that soothed him more surely than the skald's songs during evening gatherings. Sometimes a wave would lash his calves, and he would lift his head, captivated by the surge and the darkness of the maelstrom, as if seeking to become one with the primal force of the world. At gatherings, he sat near his mother Alruna and his father Sigurd, where thick embers burned in the hearth. The skald Einar Silver Tongue unfurled his tales, the saga of Freyr and the first rain, the song of the battle of Bravelir, the cunning of Loki, and the deceits leading to the gods' trials. Listening to these words woven with fury and wisdom, young Ragnar sat motionless, absorbing each sound like a spell. He understood without understanding. These stories wove in him a spur, the vague certainty that his own destiny would one day merge with these legends. One evening, as the shadows of heavy beams stretched to the back of the hall, Alruna approached to whisper in his ear, "Your heart is a raging sea, my son. Contain the storm, but never fully restrain it. It is your strength." Her fingers slid through the boy's still damp locks, leaving the soothing warmth of a feather on his forehead. Her words resounded louder than the howling wind outside. In the gentleness of her voice, Ragnar felt the quiet authority of a queen ready to launch her heir toward greatness and trial. Very early, Ketil Flatnose, the veteran warrior, took Ragnar under his wing. Each morning before dawn, he taught him to raise a wooden shield against gusts and to hold a blade as lightly as a bird on the fan of his fingers. Under the pale sky, they practiced the striking serpent movement, where the sword glided with lightning speed and the rooted tree stance, anchoring the man against opposing assaults. Ketil allowed no room for error. Each misstep met with a sharp correction, but always followed by a word of encouragement, a discreet smile when the young apprentice truly hit the target. To the sound of metal against wood, Ragnar discovered the art of channeling his ardor into sharp precision, forging in his soul a raw and dangerous balance. By his side, Björn, his elder brother by 2 years, exerted a gentler yet equally rigorous influence. In the calm of the nearby forest, Björn introduced him to tracking deer, the subtle songs of tits, and the art of discerning in the rustle of ferns the presence of a fox or wolf. On summer afternoons, when the low sun cast orange rays through the foliage, the two boys traced circles in the humus, sharing dreams of lands beyond the sea, forests of giant oaks, cities with golden walls and smoking altars where incense was offered to unknown gods. Björn, in a serious tone, always reminded him, "Remember that a warrior without a wise heart is a fire without ashes. Learn to see before you strike." At the forge, Thora Borgarjort completed this education. Each week, she tasked Ragnar with polishing blades brought from Frisia or spears taken from Saxons. The game was to feel under the palm, the slightest imperfection to refine the polish until the metal sang under the strokes of oil-soaked cloth. And when Thora, bent over the anvil, hammered glowing steel, her deep voice resounded, "Imbue yourself with the patience of the flame, Ragnar. Without it, steel knows neither its strength nor its fragility." Her heat-reddened fingers brushed the sword as if breathing life into it, and Ragnar, observing this ritual, understood that each blade was a traveling companion, an extension of the warrior's soul. Despite this circle of affection and teaching, Ragnar sometimes felt, in the depths of his nights, shadows too heavy for a child. It was then that he sought refuge with the seer Gudrun in her clearing hut, where the air smelled of dried herbs and melted wax. She welcomed him without a word, seating him on a pale reindeer hide. Then, by the light of a crude lamp, she traced circles of salt and arranged runic bones in an arc. Blinding the boy's eyes, she murmured, "See beyond the visible, Ragnar. Forebodings scratch your flesh like ravens' beaks, but true vision springs from intuition, where fear and hope meet." At these words, her fingers shook the bones, and the child sensed, deep within, a dull drumbeat, a primal rhythm, the pulse of a heart preparing for war and legend. Between fire, steel, and runes, Ragnar grew, bearing an inner tumult as powerful as the storms that tore the sea. The days passed, a prelude to the ultimate trial, the initiation on Vidiclint Cliff. But even before this ritual passage, the echo of a name destined for immortality vibrated around him. The ravens, Odin's messengers, constantly circled the skies, and the wind's breath sometimes whispered in the forest a strange word, Lodbrok, as if nature itself saluted the child whose stormy gaze would never cease to stir the world. Chapter 2. The Warrior's Initiation. The first step toward the sea. The first rays of dawn had not yet pierced the horizon when Ragnar stood on the shore, his body heavy with sleep, but his mind vibrating with new energy. Before him, the hull of the family Drakkar loomed like a sleeping wooden dragon, its serpent-headed prow ready to pounce on the sea. Around it, the oars lay silent, arranged by Kettle Flatnose the previous evening, while the wind carried the echo of waves rolling toward the shore like an ancient melody inviting the child to cross the sacred threshold of initiation. The water, a deep blue flecked with foam, reflected the fleeting clouds, tracing moving arabesques beneath the hull, a promise of a journey that would forever bind man and ocean. Seated near the prow, Kettle, in dark armor with sword and shield at his hip, scrutinized every grain of the ship's wood with an expert eye. "Look at the curve of the keel, Ragnar," he said in a low voice, as if not to startle the sea gods. "It slices through the water effortlessly, parting the waves like a blade. It's what will carry your name to the cliffs of England and the shores of Wessex." With his calloused fingers, he ran along the prow, pointing to the runes carved by Thora the day before. Uruz for the sea's strength, Sawilo for salvation from the waves, Ansus for the god's word. All around, the wood still exhaled the warmth of the fire that had dried it, mingled with the salty scent of seaweed before immersion steeped it in a sharper aroma, that of adventure. As Ragnar adjusted his tunic to shield it from the biting wind, Björn joined him, carrying a leather sack filled with provisions. "Don't forget the barley bread and smoked lard," he whispered, setting the bag beside him. "We'll need strength when the swell rises like a mountain." His words betrayed the concern of an elder brother, aware that this embarkation was far more than a simple voyage. It was the trial that would consecrate Ragnar as first among his kin. A solemn silence hung for a moment, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant cry of a seagull that seemed to salute their departure. On the beach, Alruna, draped in a silver-edged fur cloak, waited, her hand clenched around a small steel talisman. As she approached, Ragnar felt his heart tighten. Her delicate face, illuminated by the diffuse light, contrasted with the hard steel of the object she offered him. "Keep this close to your neck, my son," she whispered in a trembling voice. "It's the last pendant of your ancestress Hildur, dedicated to Freya. May it protect you from shadows and unseen wounds." The tears she held back gleamed like dewdrops, but her gaze remained proud. She knew her blessing, mingled with the ancestral talisman, would carry Ragnar across waters where life and death intertwine. Sigurd, his gaze steady, approached in turn. He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder and, without a word, handed him his own helm adorned with stylized horns. "Take it," he said simply. This gesture, more eloquent than 1,000 speeches, sealed the royal transmission. Both king and warrior, Ragnar was preparing to prove his worth not within the walls of Ringerike, but in the vast, shifting expanse of the sea. At that moment, a flock of ravens crossed the sky, forming a black cloud suspended like an omen. Some saw in this swarm Odin's shadow, others the evil eye of enemies. Kettle, however, smiled. "There's no finer augury than the voice of ravens. They sing your coming greatness." The clink of boots on wood now marked the rhythm of embarkation. Under Ketil's orders, Ragnar boarded, followed by Björn and a few young warriors chosen to form his inaugural crew. They took their places along the benches, hands gripping the oars like miniature spears. Thora, remaining on the beach, waved her handkerchief, her face grave but filled with fervent emotion. She had etched her affection onto every blade she polished, and her farewell resonated in Ragnar like a vow. Beyond, Gudrun bowed at the forest's edge, delivering a final warning. "Your blood will beat to the rhythm of the waves, but always strive to keep the earth beneath your feet, child of the runes." When the strong thrust of the oars broke the silence, the hull glided with a shiver into the water. The touch of wet wood, the smooth glide of oars opening the way, the lingering smell of tar applied for waterproofing, all awakened the senses. The Drakkar moved slowly away, leaving behind the shore where the anxious silhouettes of villagers gathered to witness the departure. Their cries of joy and encouragement mingled with the dull sound of blades striking the water as the ship gained speed, hoisting its sail with sturdy hands. Gradually, the east faded, swallowed by the morning mist, and Ragnar felt a foreign intoxication rise within him, that of the world's edges, where the sea knows neither limits nor laws. The clouds, pulled by a new wind, drew shifting shapes in the sky, evoking in his mind the image of a celestial dragon ready to pounce. A low rumble sounded in the distance. Foam crashed against an invisible reef, a prelude to the first nautical trial. Kettle, alerted, looked at Ragnar in the water's murky reflection. "Keep your axe ready and your gaze steady, boy. As long as your heart remains calm, even raging waves won't bring you down." As a first wave rocked the hull, chipping the dark varnish, each man tightened his grip on the oar, discovering the sharpness of every muscle, the rising warmth radiating from the back, the strength concentrating in arms and torso. Foam splashed onto the deck, striking Alruna's talisman against Kettle's armor in a faint metallic chime. Ragnar felt a brief hesitation, all his past, until then drawn from family legends, now merged with the fury of the present. A shiver ran down his spine, which he momentarily mistook for the wind's caress. The Drakkar, propelled by the combined energy of oars and wind, now sliced through higher waves, their gleaming crests breaking against the hull in jubilant crashes. As the shore vanished, replaced by the vast heaving expanse, Ragnar felt the child he had been slip away too, carried off by the current of a new destiny. The first step toward the sea was thus taken, not merely a journey, but the initiation of a future warrior, whom the gods, as the ravens seemed to whisper, would claim amid battle cries and mournful laments. At the moment the Drakkar reached deep foam, Kettle placed a hand on Ragnar's shoulder and, in a solemn whisper, completed the rite of passage. "In the name of Odin and Thor, I proclaim you son of the waves and brother of the storms. May your oars never bend under the sea's wrath, and may your name echo through the ages." The boy, his gaze turned to the infinite horizon, replied in a steady voice, "I seal this pact in blood. I will be the equal of gods on the foam, and my enemy's fury will never reach me." Thus ended Ragnar Lodbrok's first step toward his true destiny, a step carved in salt and legend, a vow tied to the sea and sealed by the breath of the ancients. The sword forged in the steel of destiny. At the heart of Kattegat, nestled between cliffs and churning waters, stood Thora Borgarhjort's forge. Before dawn, the dormant embers awoke under the smith's gentle breath, while smoke rose in lazy spirals toward the dark beams. The air vibrated with a faint crackle like a whisper of ancient fire spirits, and the acrid scent of charcoal mingled with the softer aroma of heated linseed oil used to treat the steel. In this sanctuary of warmth, every drop of sweat falling on the beaten earth floor resounded like a drum, a reminder that the soul of weapons is forged first in the ardor of sacrifice. When Ragnar arrived, the first ray of light slipped through the wooden shutters, casting a golden glow on Thora's face. She was bent over the anvil, hammer poised to strike the glowing blade. At the sight of her pupil, she raised her hand, palm open, to delay the assault. "Observe, Ragnar," she said in a deep voice, filled with respect for the still hot metal. "Steel doesn't yield to brute force. It submits to patience and precision." At her feet, a shower of sparks burst in a crackle of fleeting diamonds, then fell as gray ash. Ragnar, clad in a thick tunic and protected by a leather apron, approached with reverence. He felt the acrid smell of heated iron, the bite of the sea wind mingling with the forge's intense heat. In his fingers he held the hilt of a nascent sword, a blade still rough, barely shaped, but its shimmering surface hinted at a rare brilliance. Every hammer strike Thora continued, traces a line in your destiny. The sword won't just bear your name, it will tell your story. Her words rang out, triumphant and solemn. From the doorway, Sigurd Ring and Alruna stood in the shadows, their silhouettes framed by the flickering light. The king watched his son with restrained pride. The helm he had worn in countless battles now rested on a wooden bench, ready to be offered to Ragnar. Alruna, her hand clenched around a pendant engraved with maternal runes, kept tears at bay, aware that this ritual marked her son's entry into the circle of warriors. With each powerful strike, she felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet, as if the earth itself hailed the birth of a new hero. Ketil Flatnose, leaning on his weathered axe, stepped forward as a fragment of glowing steel fell into the quenching trough, producing a harsh hiss. Remember, Ragnar, the quench is the sword's second birth, the veteran declared. In icy water, the metal hardens, gains its steel soul. At these words he plunged the blade into the deep basin, and white steam escaped, encircling the scene in a mysterious halo. The moment hung suspended, the steam rose in spirals, forming fleeting shapes, ravens or dragons, depending on one's imagination. Thora then took a piece of activated charcoal and ran its tip over the blade, revealing a silvery gleam beneath the black soot. She murmured words in Old Norse, blessing the object to be oil and just iron, a mirror of the warrior's soul. Beside her, Gudrun the seer, whose turf hut stood nearby, joined the circle. Her slender fingers grasped a wooden box carved with runic symbols, Uruz for strength, Tiwaz for honor, Raido for the journey. Slowly, she traced the characters on the still warm blade. Their burn left dark scars like lines of life etched in the metal. Björn, clad in light chainmail, completed the ritual by pouring a mixture of linseed oil and resin over the edge, smoothing the surface with a precise gesture. He raised his eyes to Ragnar. May this steel bind you to your brothers in arms, as it binds us today, he said. The fraternal bond manifested in a pause, where each figure seemed to hold their breath. Even the flames wavered, as if hesitant to break the sacred silence. Then Björn smiled, letting out a satisfied sigh. It's time to forge your name in the fire of war. A distant rumble accompanied the arrival of a sea gust, making the shadows dance on the forge's walls. Ragnar, weary of prodigies and omens, knelt before Thora and Ketil. Thora handed him the rough leather hilt, softened by tightly wound strips. Each notch, each twist testified to the smith's patience. Ketil placed the flat of his blade against his apprentice's shoulder. "Listen closely," he whispered. Ragnar leaned in, and he discerned the low hum of dormant metal like a heart ready to race. Then came the final moment. Ragnar lifted the sword in a slow gesture, admiring the perfect curve of the blade and the brilliance of its edge. The sky seemed to respond. A lightning bolt suddenly streaked the horizon through the open door, as if Thor himself approved the work. Ragnar felt his muscles awaken, his grip firm, and he spoke in a clear voice. "By the flame, by the blood of my ancestors, by the promise of the runes, I take this blade to fulfill my destiny." A reverent silence enveloped the room, disturbed only by the breath of divine guests in the storm raging outside. Thora placed a hand on Ragnar's shoulder, and Gudrun added, "Go, son of the mists. With this steel, be a scourge to your enemies and a shield to your kin." Kettle, touching his helm, concluded, "For in the end, a man is what he does with his sword. Choose the path of the warrior and of honor." As Ragnar left the forge, the sword at his belt, the weight of the steel pressing against his hip, he felt the strength of destiny vibrate in every muscle, in every drop of sweat. Outside, the night closed with a thunderclap, and Kattegat's waves crashed against the rocks like a call to adventure. At his side, Björn and Ketil gathered the tools. Thora stored her charcoal fragments, and Gudrun took her runic box. Together, they formed the close guard of a young warrior whose name already promised songs and battles. Thus ended the forging of the sword in the steel of destiny. The sharp weapon, nourished by fire and rune, would become Ragnar Lodbrok's faithful shadow, companion of his first raids and witness to future triumphs. From the moment the steel cooled, the legend bound itself to the metal, beginning a new chapter the world would remember under the name of a man born of mists and raised by fire. The runes whisper his name. At the edge of the sacred forest, where century-old trees raised their gnarled trunks toward the sky, Ragnar advanced with a solemn step. Around him, the ground was carpeted with red and gold leaves, remnants of a fading autumn. Ketil Flatnose dragged behind him an oak chest reinforced with iron bands, sealed with protective runes. Algiz for defense, Thurisaz for strength, Awaz for the journey. Each metallic strike on the wood echoed in the air like a divine thunder, a portent of ancient power ready to awaken. When the chest was set on the ground, Thora Borgarhjort knelt beside it. Her trembling hand slid open the lid, revealing a series of rune stones carved from black granite and white marble. Each stone bore a single character: Fehu for spiritual wealth, Urus for vigor, Ansus for the god's wisdom, Raido for the soul's journey. The stones gleamed in the dim light, as if capturing the radiance of the stars themselves, ready to whisper their secrets to those who could hear. Ragnar, draped in a hooded cloak of rough wool, placed a hesitant hand on the Ansu's stone. At the touch of the cold granite, a subtle vibration coursed through his fingers like a tickle of pure energy. In the complete silence of the clearing, he sensed a faint quiver, a barely audible breath, akin to the rustle of a nocturnal bird's wing. Ketil tilted his head, eyes half closed. "The runes speak to those who do not fear silence," he whispered. "Listen to them." Guided by this injunction, Ragnar began tracing concentric circles in the earth, linking each stone with a furrow carved by the tip of his spear. Beneath his steps, the ground seemed to resonate, and the morning light took on a strange, golden, supernatural hue. The birds ceased singing, frozen in the branches, while the breeze halted abruptly, as if making way for another world. Thora, hands clasped, prayed in a low voice the ancient names: Odin, Freya, Tyr, Sif, invoking protection and foresight for the future warrior. At the circle's center, Gudrun appeared suddenly, her veils floating around her like a spectral cloud. She held a polished slate mirror in her hands. "Look at your reflection, Ragnar Lodbrok," she said in a low, vibrant voice. "See what the runes reveal of your soul." When the boy gazed at his face, reflected in the mirror, framed by shifting shadows, he thought he glimpsed beyond his youthful features the gleam of an accomplished warrior, the scars of battles, and the wavering crown of legend. Then Gudrun breathed on the mirror's surface, and a light mist rose, engulfing the clearing in a twilight ambiance. The runes carved on the stones glowed with a pale spectral blue, as if awakening to life. Each emitted an imperceptible song, a low hum that vibrated in the ears, resonating in Ragnar's chest like a call to rise against the world. At that moment, he reached for his sword's hilt, and the metal responded with a faint quiver, mirroring the runic echo. Björn, standing watch, observed the scene with fraternal gravity. Beside him, Einar Silvertongue was no longer a skald, but a medium of the runes. He repeated in a low voice incantations inscribed on the shores of the ice sea, where it was believed the gods carved men's fates. His mysterious guttural words slid through the air like an ancient chant, enveloping Ragnar in a sonic blanket that calmed the boy's inner storm. When the chant ceased, Gudrun pointed to the Uruz stone. "Touch it, son of Sigurd, and accept the strength offered to you," she said. Ragnar knelt, placing his palm on the rough granite. A flash of white light burst forth, piercing the clearing shadow and reflecting off nearby trunks. He blinked, dazzled. When his vision returned, he thought he saw the image of a colossal bull raising its horned head through the dawn mists. Then the vision faded, leaving only the acrid scent of wax and heated stones. A shock wave rippled through the circle, and Ragnar felt his spine stiffen like a flagpole. He rose, his gaze broader, and slowly spoke the rune's name, Uruz. His deep, assured voice echoed against the trees. Thora smiled, a tear on the verge of falling. "Now your heart beats to the rhythm of primal strength," she murmured. Ketil placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hold this power, but never seek to master it. Be the rune's master, not its slave." Beyond the circle, the sky split in two, letting a sunbeam strike the Fehu stone. In that ray of light, Ragnar thought he heard the distant chime of hidden treasure, and the world suddenly seemed rich with promises, conquests, alliances, feasts, where his name would be sung by skalds in Europe's great halls. But he also knew that every joy would carry its shadow of suffering, that every victory would bear the weight of lives offered. When Gudrun gathered the runes from the circle and stored them in their case, silence fell over the clearing. Ragnar, his muscles still vibrating with runic energy, raised his eyes to the assembly. "I will carry these runes on my skin, on my shield, and in my dreams," he declared. "I will be the echo of their words, and the world will never forget the name of Ragnar Lodbrok." And as he walked away, escorted by his companions, a final murmur slipped between the trunks. The runes, gathered up, resumed their silence, awaiting the moment when another warrior would come to hear their song. Chapter 3. The Conquests of a King. The Drakkar's charge toward the west dawn was but a silvery sigh when the fleet of Drakkars set into motion, gliding silently out of Kattegat Fjord. The sleek hulls sliced through the water like a pack of sea wolves, their serpent-headed prows plunging into the whitening foam. The linen sails, almost lunar in their whiteness, swelled with the steady breath of the north wind, imparting a solemn cadence to the ship that resonated in the heart of every man aboard. At the center, Ragnar Lodbrok stood tall, wrapped in a dark winter cloak, his hands clasped on the hilt of his newly forged sword. Around him, the warriors, a mix of brothers in arms chosen for their bravery and artisans whose skill in hammering had ensured the ship's construction, mimicked the rhythm of the waves, striking the water with their oars. Kettle Flatnose, his face weathered by battles, kept the cadence with relentless precision, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Beside him, Bjorn, quieter than usual, watched every glint of light on the waves, ready to alert his kin to any threat. The muffled roll of drums hidden below deck made the hull vibrate, a reminder that they were the embodied swell, a single surge, and their fury would sweep away all obstacles. The wind, complicit in the sea's secrets, carried the scent of spray and the distant murmur of Saxon shores. In that solemn moment, each man reflected on the tales of Einar's silver tongue, who had sung of England's ports as golden citadels with thick walls. Some already imagined the cities of Lincoln and York bowing under the Viking yoke, while others shuddered at the thought of the bloody sacrifice those ancient walls would demand. But all shared the same flame, to write, with their axe blows, a new glorious chapter in Ragnar's saga. The lead Drakkar, adorned with a black-scaled dragon, led the way. Its oars glided with a serpent's precision, carving white furrows touched by the rising sun's first rays. Thora Borgarjort, with a steady step, climbed the gangway to the front, a box of small talismans in her arms. Each charm, crafted from leather and bronze, bore a protective rune: Algas against enemy arrows, Iwas for resilience against storms, Thurisaz for the shield's strength. She distributed them to each rower, murmuring a blessing in Old Norse. May steel serve you, and the sea carry you. The discreet symphony of the Drakkars mingled with the hoarse calls of seagulls, which sometimes followed the ships like familiar specters. Their shrill cries pierced the air, reminding Ragnar of Odin's omnipresence, whose ravens came and went, pledges of a divine design. The young king felt these omens in every fiber of his being. A shiver ran down his spine when he glimpsed in the water's reflection a flock of ravens forming a circle as if crowning his endeavor. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the salty air and etching into his sensory memory the sensation of the spray's icy embrace. In the second rank, the archers stirred, sharpening their arrows of elm and yew. The wood cracked between their calloused fingers as they fitted bone and iron tips, tied horsehair cords to quivers, and refined the notch of the bowstring. One of them, Harold Red-Eyes, murmured to Ragnar, "The Franks are weak against our rain of arrows," echoing a refrain learned at gatherings. But Ragnar, more measured, shook his head. Against a stone wall, even 1,000 arrows fall like autumn rain. Prepare for the clash of the axe as well. In the assault, they had not only steel and bronze as allies, the spirit of the pack, the brotherhood of shared labor at the oars, formed an indomitable force. They sang warlike verses in low voices, blending the poetry of ancient myths with the conqueror's brutal words. Axe in hand, heart ablaze, the world bends before my song. These words, repeated in unison, resounded like a war drum, projecting their collective will beyond the waves. The coast of Northumbria appeared suddenly, a misty silhouette wavering on the horizon. Chalk cliffs, battered by waves, took shape in gray swirls, marked by black sores where water roared in. A thread of mist rose from the land, carrying the scent of wet hay and distant incense, that of monasteries ceded to the Franks, refuges of monks the Vikings saw as pockets of unexpected riches. Ketil, sensing the change, gripped the handle of his axe. "Ready to strike when the coast yields to our shadow?" he ordered. Ragnar nodded and looked at his men. Each carried at his belt a sword adorned with Thora's runes, a finely engraved dagger inherited from family lines, and a heart swollen with proud determination. He offered them a brief but promise-laden smile. "We will make our banners stream in York. We will make Lincoln and Canterbury tremble. But remember, glory lasts only if our honor survives. Brothers, may the sea and the gods protect you." At that word, a dark sky seemed to split, letting a ray of light glide over the lead Drakkar's prow, illuminating the carved dragon. Ragnar took it as a sign. The time for the fateful march to the west had begun. The Drakkar sliced through the final waves, swiftly approaching a deserted beach of pale sand speckled with pebbles, sheltered by a narrow cove. The men stowed their oars, secured the mooring lines, and lowered the sail. A silence fell, heavy with anticipation. When the keels scraped the shore, Ragnar set foot on the sand and felt the earth's firmness beneath his soaked boots. A gust of wind dispersed the coastal mist, revealing the English horizon in all its green and gray melancholy. He raised his eyes to the hills, already imagining sentinels atop the walls, the clamor of alarms. He took a deep breath. "Here's our world to conquer," he declared in a low but firm voice. "May the gods guide us, and may our names echo through the centuries." Thus, under a trembling sky and a cloud of seagulls, the Drakkars charged toward the west, fusing steel and determination to write a new epic in the history of Ragnar Lodbrok and his brothers-in-arms. The siege of Paris and the terror of the wall's dawn was barely breaking over the Seine when Ragnar Lodbrok's Drakkars appeared on the horizon, gliding along the waterway like tawny shadows, slipping silently beneath the city's walls. The chalky towers of Paris took shape as gray silhouettes, dominated by the nascent cathedral, whose spires pierced the morning clouds. The air, thick with mist, carried the acrid smell of pitch and damp wood, mingled with the fainter scent of hay and livestock pens along the banks. Aboard the flagship, Ragnar, draped in a dark fur cloak, scanned the fortifications, his steel blue eyes reflecting the determination etched in his soul. At his side, Ketil Flatnose, the archer with temples streaked with scars, placed a hand on his axe's pommel and murmured, "Look at those walls, boy. They seem as invincible as Charles the Bald's will. But remember, where the enemy feels safe, the Viking always finds a weakness." The distant toll of an alarm bell answered his words as the first Frankish guards stirred on the ramparts. Björn, Ragnar's elder brother, stood in ambush in the hold, preparing grappling hooks and rope ladders. His face, both calm and determined, contrasted with the nervous agitation of the young warriors whispering prayers to Thor and Freya. Thora Borgarjurt, the smith, distributed the last arrows to the archers, their tips coated with a light poison to unsettle the besieged. She whispered to Ragnar, May the night be your ally and the moon guide your shots. The ship approached the bank, its oars silent, suspended in a motionless ballet before the assault. The Seine's banks, strewn with reeds and the scattered wreckage of abandoned boats, seemed to retreat into the mist, as if yielding to Viking fury. In the distance, a Frankish lookout spotted the Drakkar's shadow, and the alarm rose. "The Normans! The Normans!" The cry echoed through the city, spreading through narrow streets, waking inhabitants still in their night clothes, bells on the shoes, wielding carpenters' axes and farmers' pitchforks. As the city prepared its defense, Ragnar ordered the launch of the first ladders. The mooring lines creaked, ropes groaned under the men's weight, and grappling hooks clanged against the stone ramparts. The first Vikings climbed, their leather gloves scraping the masonry, while the Franks retaliated with arrows and javelins. The sharp snap of arrows piercing the air vied with the thud of boots on wet wood. A rain of weapons converged on the assailants, and torch smoke clouded the fresh air, giving Paris's towers the look of smoldering volcanoes. On the bank, Thora urged the archers, pointing to the loopholes where defenders gathered. With a precise gesture, she adjusted a young Viking's bow, whispering, "Aim for the visor, not the shield. Break the gaze before you break the sword." The arrows whistled, and the Frankish shield wall recoiled under the salvo, opening a breach wide enough for Kettle and his men to rush in. The thunder of combat echoed through the city, shaking the stones of buildings and casting fear into the hearts of women gathered behind the walls. In the tumult, Ragnar climbed the slippery slope, closely followed by Björn and Harold Redeyes. Raindrops, now falling heavily, hammered helmets and dripped from cloaks, turning the ground into a slick carpet of mud. Yet the Viking warriors advanced as if intoxicated by the melee's fury, their swords singing with each cut, their axes clanging against armor and repelling lances. A monk, crouched behind a loophole, raised his arms to the heavens, calling on the saints, but an axe blow sliced through the air, and a deathly silence fell over him. Within the walls, panic seized some defenders, while others, led by a court knight named Gauthier de Saint-Valery, tried to retake the breach. A counterattack formed before an iron-bound oak gate. The Vikings, sheltered under two large towers, faced a frontal assault. The clash of reddened blades sparked, and cries of agony mingled with war cries. Kettle took a mace blow to his shoulder plate, crushing the metal and gashing his flesh. He growled, raised his axe, and delivered a devastating strike, splitting his opponent's helm in two. Ragnar, his heart ablaze, reached the top of the main tower. From there, he saw Paris at his feet, the glazed tile roofs, the streets where weeping civilians fled to the cathedral, the stone churches. The young king smelled fire, blood, and burning resin. He raised his sword to the sky, and his war cry, hoarse and powerful, split the air, "For Kattegat, for the kings of old." His men answered with a fierce chorus, and the tower trembled under the force of their exultation. For hours the battle raged. The Vikings took one bastion after another, sliding from tower to tower on wooden logs they had hoisted. Thick black smoke poured from burning chimneys, blending with the night clouds. Thora, gravely wounded in the shoulder by a dart, braced herself against a beam, forcing makeshift surgeons to cauterize her wound with embers. Despite the pain, she continued directing the transfer of supplies and gunners. By morning, King Charles the Bald, forced to flee his palace, sent heralds to propose peace. Paris's gates finally opened, and the Vikings, weary but victorious, marched out in ranks, celebrating their triumph with a mournful chant. Ragnar paused before the still intact cathedral, placed the tip of his sword on a marble tile, and dropped a dagger and 2 pouches filled with mancus, the tribute demanded for the city's surrender. The bells tolled one last time, their chimes mingling with the now distant scent of battle. This siege, recounted by the Skalds as the Night of 1,000 Fires, marked the pinnacle of Ragnar Lodbrok's fame. The walls of Paris, once a symbol of invincibility, became the stage of his power, reminding the West that the shadow of the Drakkars matched the fear they inspired. As the Viking fleet set sail again, the capital's ground still echoed with the tremors of terror, and Ragnar's name spread like a living legend carved in stone and the blood of men. Alliances and betrayals on the English shores, Ragnar's Drakkars now glided through less hostile but no less treacherous waters. After the capture of Paris, the Nordic warriors had set sail for England, drawn by rumors of unlikely alliances and venom lurking in trade. On York's beach, the ships moored directly on the pebble-strewn sand, while the sky tore with storm, casting stinging lightning and a low rumble that seemed to foretell human duplicity. The banners, forged by Thora, 2 steel ravens facing each other, snapped under the fine rain, a fleeting image of a brotherhood soon to be broken. Ragnar, clad in a black linen tunic and tanned leather, received the delegation of Egbert of Northumbria on the dune. The stocky English king, with a salt and pepper beard, approached cautiously, escorted by a guard of heavy infantry, bearing shields painted with red crosses. In his gaze read feigned fear and secret hope. He offered the Vikings a trade treaty, rights to plunder abandoned churches, tents, and supplies in exchange for protecting the coasts from other raids. "Your axes have broken our gates," he admitted in a hoarse voice, "but give us time to stitch our fears into gold. Come, let us trade rather than spill endless blood." Around the campfire the Viking chiefs debated. Björn frowned. "Trustworthy, this Egbert. He offers bread today to appease us, but tomorrow will he betray the axe when crowns clink?" Kettle, a scar from an old duel streaking his cheek, nodded. "The Saxons trade their oaths as they trade their faith. Let's beware as much of the given word as the spoken name." A silence fell, disturbed only by the crackle of sodden logs and the sea wind's breath. To seal the agreement, Ragnar sat, hunched over a tripod of stones, and signed a rune in blood on the treaty. The vermilion ink mingled with the rain, forming splattered stains on the rough parchment. "A pact is a pact," he declared in a cold tone, and Egbert handed him in return a pouch of mancus stamped with the portrait of his son, Prince Ethelred. Their handshake, firm, seemed to suspend the betrayal to come. Yet, on the second night, the ravens stirred above the English camp. The seer Gudrun, invited to the gathering with Thora and Einar the Skald, wove red wool threads around their stone brazier. She whispered, "Shadows spread like a cursed sea. Listen to the creak of the woods. Even the holiest pact bends under the breath of deceit." Her moving fingers traced a broken pentacle on the ground, a symbol of a vow fractured before it was even spoken. At first light, the Anglo-Viking fleet weighed anchor to reach the Humber estuary, escorted by Saxon cavalry. But the embassy halted abruptly at a cove hidden behind a rocky spur. A group of English riders, led by Lord Ethelhelm, charged screaming, lances raised. These warriors, meant to protect the convoy, betrayed the oath sworn the previous night. They slaughtered the pack animals, burned the supplies, and gravely wounded Harold Red Eyes, who staggered into a ditch before Björn rescued him. Weapons gleamed in the soaked sun, forging a deadly shimmer. In the chaos, Ragnar leapt from the Drakkar, his blazing sword slicing the air like lightning. He roared, "Traitors! You'd sell your brothers for a false smile." His cry rose above the melee, galvanizing the Viking warriors who, swords raised, stormed the cove with shouts. Horses reared, squires fell, and the sodden ground turned into a quagmire where all sank. Kettle, with a war cry, cut down Northumbria's royal banner, nailing it to a rock with his axe's point, a symbol of punished perfidy. When blood mingled with mud, Egbert, trembling, appeared on the main dune, pleading with Ragnar, "Master of the waves, forgive my baron's folly." But Ragnar, whose stormy soul was not appeased by a bowed head, decreed, "A broken oath is paid in golden lives. You will offer not only your tribute, but also hospitality in your dungeons, where our warriors will feast on the taste of your betrayal." Thus ended the cursed alliance. The treachery consumed, the fleet set sail again, its Drakkars gliding on a bed of fog, colored deep red by vengeance. The stolen supplies and slaughtered beasts would remain, in Viking memory, a scar sharper than many sword blows. And as the horizon reddened with dawn's first light, Ragnar, eyes fixed on the waves, swore to the sea a vow graver than that of men. "I swear, ocean, to punish every traitor with a torment worthy of their lie, and to proclaim your name into the earth's very depths." Chapter 4. Love, Shadows, and Omens. Lagertha, the shield maiden, with a heart of fire. In the shifting gold of twilight, as the sun seemed to melt into the sea like a glowing copper ingot, Ragnar Lodbrok arrived at the camp perched on the crest of a small hill overlooking Kattegat. The tents glowed under the light of torches arranged in a circle, casting dancing shadows on the ground beaten by the sea breeze. Among them, one figure stood out. Lagertha, the shield maiden, advanced with a confident stride, her helmet adorned with delicate wings beneath her raised chin. Her scarlet cape floated behind her, and her green eyes, whose brilliance rivaled that of the torches, fixed on Ragnar with an intensity both gentle and fierce. He had met her a few moons earlier during a raid on the Frisian coast. She had stood alone against a group of Saxon warriors, her round shield like a crescent moon, and her gleaming axe repelling the assault with a virtuosity that froze the blood of her attackers. Since then, whenever Ragnar thought of war, it was her image that returned, a warrior both beautiful and terrifying, a living flame capable of setting men's hearts ablaze and bending steel with her precise strikes. Upon his arrival, silence fell over the camp. The sentries lowered their heads, the skalds paused their melodies, and the brass horns fell silent. For a moment, no candle flickered, as if even the wind held its breath. Ragnar greeted her with a nod, removing his helm to reveal his dark hair, slightly damp from the fine twilight rain. Lagertha placed her hand on the hilt of her short sword, Sigrun, its blade still bearing the marks of her last clash. Faint, dark notches, scars of a duel whose vibrant memory still haunted the steel's edge. "You came?" Ragnar asked in a deep voice, harmonizing with the rustle of the wind through the pines. "As I always have," she replied, her thumb brushing a rune engraved on the leather boot protecting her shin. This rune, a gift from the seer Gudrun, signified protection and glowed with an ashen gleam when touched by the light. "You invited me here on the eve of an expedition that could alter the course of this year." Around them, the air was thick with the acrid scent of embers and salt, reminding Ragnar of the violence of the storms they had faced. The rain intensified, falling in transparent curtains that made Lagertha's armor shimmer. Each droplet seemed to cling to her shield, slide along her shoulder, tracing a silver trail across the curved blade. She raised her forehead, letting the rain wet her face without a shiver. "Tomorrow we will strike the port of York," Ragnar continued, his gaze turned toward the horizon where the lights of a sleeping Saxon city glimmered. "This raid will determine the loyalty of the Northumbrian lords and cement our presence in England." Lagertha nodded, adjusting the collar of her fur-lined leather cloak. "I will go with you. Your warriors need a heart, and I will give you mine, rather than let your hand falter." Her tone was firm, but a glimmer of emotion veiled her eyes. They walked together toward Ketil Flatnose's tent, the war chief and Ragnar's mentor. On the way, they passed Björn, busy checking arrowheads and bowstrings. As they approached, he gave a quick bow. "Ragnar, Lagertha." His voice carried a subtle apprehension. Every war camp bears the unease of the eve and the thrill of the coming night. "Everything is ready. The Drakkars will set sail at dawn." In the oval tent, Ketil, his head bound with a leather band, issued his final orders. Maps etched on wax tablets rested on a tripod, while scalds, quills in hand, recorded the runes drawn for the night. "The winds will blow from the northeast," Ketil announced, pointing to the arrows carved on the tablet. "The sea will be rough, but will offer a veil of mist until we reach the coast." He cast a piercing glance at Lagertha. "You will be at the forefront, shield maiden. Break the ropes of your Drakkar, and let the clash of your shield be the thunder of the storm." Lagertha nodded, a half-smile breaking through. "I will break so many ropes that the Franks will tell tales of a Viking earthquake." Her words were light, but her fierce gaze reminded all that she did not indulge in metaphors. Ragnar lingered a moment alone with her in the flickering glow of blackened embers. He ran a hand through his wet hair. "I don't know what the future holds," he confided, "but I know that as long as you stand by my side, I will not falter." Lagertha placed her palm against his heart. "And I will never falter as long as you bear the weight of the runes on your shoulders." A shiver ran through the air, like an omen carved from the very substance of the night. Outside, the wind seemed to calm for a moment, then surged again, whistling through the ropes and singing beneath the tent's sails. The torches flickered, casting shadows with uncertain contours like specters on the march. As Ragnar and Lagertha left the tent, The seer Gudrun appeared in the doorway, her veils floating around her. She held out a leather pouch embroidered with red threads. "For both of you," she said in a hushed voice, "this contains moonstones. They ward off nightmares and tell the gods to dance to the vigor of your union." Lagertha accepted the pouch, slipping its contents into the lining of her breastplate. Ragnar brushed Gudrun's hand in thanks. The seer bowed her head and vanished into the tent shadows. At the camp's edge they found Thora, polishing Sigrun's blade. The sparks from her work scattered in the night like fireflies escaped from a dream, a bitter-sweet omen of a life about to be risked. She looked up and smiled at Lagertha. "May your axe be as just as your heart is valiant." Lagertha responded with a gesture of gratitude, then turned on her heel. The two lovers returned to the fjord's edge, where their Drakkars stood aligned, ready to drink the sea. Their silhouettes stood out against the glassy water, two shadows merged in the flickering torchlight, poised to write a new verse in the saga of Ragnar Lodbrok. Beneath the starry vault, visible intermittently through the clouds, each felt the promise of war and a fiery love vibrate within them. The shield maiden with a heart of fire and the king of storms launched themselves together into the unknown, united by axe and rune, determined to leave an indelible mark on history. The black dreams and Odin's raven's night fell like a velvet shroud over the tents scattered along the fjord, and the torches cast flickering glows on the exhausted faces of the warriors. Conversations grew rare, and only a few campfires still smoked beneath the black pines. Ragnar Lodbrok, restless despite a recent victory, left the clamor behind to reach his own tent, where an almost sacred silence reigned. His steps crunched on the pebbles damp with dew, while the wind carried the distant cry of nocturnal gulls and the faint beat of a forgotten drum. Inside, the camp became a sanctuary of rest, and the tents, arranged in a circle, formed a canvas enclosure akin to the ramparts of the citadels he had besieged. Ragnar removed his helm, revealing a forehead streaked with sweat and ash, and knelt beside his fur-covered bed. He felt the weight of the runes freshly tattooed on his arm. Ansus for wisdom, Rido for the journey, Thurisaz for strength, and brushed them with his fingertips as if to ensure their permanence. As he lay down, Lagertha's shadow, still awake, slipped beside him. She drew from beneath her cloak a silver reliquary engraved with the profile of a broad-winged raven and placed it on the tent's floor. "Where are you, my king?" she murmured, her voice tender and concerned. Her eyes, softer in the glow of a tallow lamp, scanned Ragnar's weary face. He took the shield maiden's hand and drew her close. "Odin's ravens keep circling above the fleet," he confided, his voice heavy with gravity. "I feel their wings beating like a warning. Some malevolent omen will arise tonight." He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the distant beat of his own heart, like a drum beneath the canvas. Lagertha placed a finger on the ash-streaked lines of his forehead. "Don't let the shadows of the night consume your mind," she said softly. "We've already faced far more than storms and walls. Your soul fears no darkness." She brushed one of the runic tattoos on his arm, as if to soothe him. Despite the comfort of her presence, Ragnar felt sleep's embrace elude him. He rose, reaching beneath his leather apron to pull out a small leather pouch and runic bones. "The ravens are hissing a warning in my head," he said, turning toward the canvas wall. "I must consult the runes before closing my eyes." With care, he poured 8 engraved bones onto a square of black cloth. Fehu, Uruz, Thurisaz, Ansus, Raido, Aiwaz, Sowilo, and Algiz. He shook them gently, murmuring an ancient incantation learned from Gudrun. "Odin, father of the dead, reveal the path to me. Let your ravens guide me through the shadows." The bones rolled with a soft clatter, and in the flickering lamplight, Ragnar studied them, seeking the rune that stood alone among the others. The first stone to settle was Thurisaz, the rune of the oak, and the giant, symbol of raw strength and unpredictable conflict. Ragnar frowned. Thurisaz's presence here signaled a violent trial brewing, a clash that neither steel nor cunning could prevent. He raised his head, his heart pounding. "A powerful enemy, hidden among us, prepares to strike," he declared. Lagertha rose as well, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "What else did you see?" she asked, her voice steady. Her fingers brushed the other bones, examining their positions. Ragnar pointed to Ansus, lying face up, the rune of divine speech and revelation. "Someone will betray us," he murmured, "and their words will shatter the trust we've built." His eyes filled with the shadow of painful foresight. He recalled Egbert's pact and the bloody betrayal that followed. On the ground, Aiwaz appeared, the rune of death and renewal. Ragnar paled. He understood that blood would soon flow in the camp, marking the passage from one era to another. Lagertha's breath warmed him. "We are bound by more than iron. As long as I live, I will protect your life, and if death calls us, I will face it by your side." Then Sowilo appeared, a bright light and solar radiance. For the first time since leaving Kattegat, a shiver of hope crossed Ragnar's heart. The rune of victory promised that triumph would follow the trial, and a new day would dawn for them. Reassured, imbued with fragile certainty, Ragnar gathered the runes and placed them back in their pouch, setting it beside Lagertha. He clasped the shield maiden's hand. "We are ready, whatever comes," he declared. Then he lay back down, his eyelid growing heavy under the weight of omens. But sleep returned like a shadow, slowly. In his dreams he saw himself transformed into a raven, black wings spread, soaring above a moonlit battlefield. He heard the cries of warriors and the sound of breaking bones mingled with the hoarse groans of the wounded. A giant tree trunk collapsed before him, crushing human forms, and the ground split to reveal a glowing chasm. He tried to cry out, but no sound emerged from his throat. His feathers fell one by one, revealing raw, bleeding flesh beneath. He plummeted into the chasm, dragged by fire and smoke, and the earth closed over him. Then he awoke with a start, his face covered in sweat, his chest heaving. Lagertha, awake, loomed over him, her hand pressed against his heart. "King of storms," she whispered, "the chasm called you, but you've returned. Your blood still flows." He sat up, passing a trembling hand over his damp forehead. "The trial is near," he said. "A serpent slithers among us." Outside, the tense canvas shook under a sudden gust of wind, and a hoarse cry rang out like a raven's call. Lagertha rose, seized her shield and sword, and signaled to Ragnar, "Stand! The hour of omens is over, the time for action begins." Thus, with black dreams dissolved and shadows dispelled by the flickering lamplight, Ragnar and Lagertha rushed out of the tent, ready to face betrayal and death, convinced that for every shadow cast by the night, Odin and the runes would offer the light needed to triumph. The feast, where fates were sealed. The vast hall, lit by torches, danced with yellow and red reflections on the ancient stone walls as the long banquet took shape under the watchful eyes of the gathered warriors. The rough oak tables groaned under the weight of hammered metal dishes, horns brimming with frothy beer, large steaming tureens of juniper-scented boar stew, trays of cheeses seasoned with honey and wild herbs, a heavy cauldron of fish broth, uncommon at warrior feasts, but dear to Ragnar's heart, simmered in a corner, spreading an iodized aroma mingled with the scent of toasted barley bread. At the center, Ragnar Lodbrok presided from a sturdy bench behind the high table, flanked by Lagertha on his right and Björn on his left. Their armor, cleansed of battle's mud and blood, now gleamed with martial polish, tanned leather, weathered iron plates, intact runic engravings. Behind them, Ketil Flatnose, his weathered face and barely faded scars, oversaw the placement of guards, while Thora Borgarhjort brought the final dish, a tureen of reindeer from the forests of Scania, offering Ragnar a knowing glance. The recent dramas, the betrayal of Ethelhelm, the nocturnal rune trial, hung in the air like a discordant undertone, yet on this evening, laughter and song reclaimed their place. The skalds, Einar Silvertongue and 2 young apprentices, took their places on a platform at the hall's far end. Einar invoked the blessing of the Norns. Daughters of time, weave the tapestry of fates, bind the axe to the rune, and seal the warrior's faith. Let the brilliance of your threads guide the future king's steps, and let the traitor's shadow drown in the banquet's oblivion. The guests responded with a rumble of horns pressed to their lips, and the musicians, with lute and lyre in hand, struck up a lively refrain, echoing old songs of peace after turmoil. The shields along the side rows served as makeshift tables, laden with food devoured by hand, roasted venison thighs with berries, toasted grains, sweet roots. The beer flowed like an amber river, wrapping wounded hearts in soothing warmth. Ragnar rose, seized his silver-rimmed horn, and surveyed the crowd. His grave, assured tone cut through the general fervor. "This feast is not merely a banquet," he announced. "It is the bridge between yesterday and tomorrow, the bond of our oaths. To you, brothers in arms, I vow to no longer let betrayal take root under my roof. As long as this horn is full, your lives will be safe from treachery." He drank deeply, a trickle of foam spilling onto his beard, then fixed his gaze on Lagertha. "And to you, shield maiden, with a heart of fire, I swear to share my victories and my shadows. Your place is here, by my side, as long as your steps guide my axes." A thunderous roar of acclaim rose, mingled with the creaking of benches and the clinking of dishes. Lagertha, her breath hoarse, raised her horn and replied, "King of storms, may your blade be swift and your word true. I will drink to your glory as long as the mist carries the foam of your exploits." Their horns clashed in a joyful crash, and the guests, galvanized, echoed the toast in unison. In the shadow of a side alcove, Gudrun the seer kept watch, her black veils falling in diaphanous folds around her wise, hollow-cheeked face. With each toast, she discreetly traced a rune on the smooth wood of her tablet, recording the evolution of the oaths. Between sips, she murmured to Thora, "Tonight, fates intertwined like roots beneath the earth. Soon they will take a form no mortal can undo." Thora nodded, sensing the shadow of a new omen beneath the warrior's laughter. As the violin struck a slower tune, Einar rose to recount Ragnar's legend. Born of cold mists, son of the king and brother of runes, he carries the storm within, the lightning in his bare fist. Let his enemies tremble, let his friends sing, for his blade awakens the night and sets the day ablaze. The flames cast dancing shadows on the floor like serpents stretching their metallic bodies toward the vaulted ceiling. The young warriors, drunk with joy, began to dance around the tables, brandishing swords and axes in a frenzied procession. The clash of weapons against coins fell into the tumult, setting a rhythmic, wild beat to the feast. Suddenly, silence fell. Björn, leaning against a wooden railing, called out to his brother, "Ragnar, look, shadows pass at the hall's entrance." Two masked strangers, one clad in a gray hauberk, the other in a dark cloak embroidered with a wolf, appeared under the porch. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, hands gripping dagger hilts. A shiver ran through the crowd. Ragnar, his eyes dark, struck the table with the flat of his fist. "Silence, Björn!" he ordered in a low voice. He rose, a flash of lightning crossing his features. "Guests are traitors under my watch. None pass without declaring themselves." With a gesture, he beckoned the two figures forward. The violin stopped. The warriors caught their breath, and silence fell like a heavy cloak. The first stranger raised his head, revealing a clean-shaven chin and a hard gaze. It was Harold Redeyes, miraculously recovered from his wound. The second removed his hood. Gudmund, the Irish emissary, bearer of offers to shift alliances. A murmur rippled through the hall. In an instant, the feast turned into an arena of cruel diplomacy. Harold, his voice hoarse, declared, "Brothers, by the blood spilled I have survived. I come to seal a new pact, a treaty of arms for gold, men for land." Voices rose in indignation. Some saw the shadow of treachery, but Gudmund raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "Hear me. The Franks, humiliated at Paris, turn to us with coffers full. If we strike a deal, we can hit harder next year. It takes only a word from Ragnar." The spears rose in the hands of the besieged, ready to leap at the emissaries' throats. Kettle intervened, imposing calm. "Let the runes speak," he suggested. "Draw 3 bones, 1 for war, 1 for alliance, 1 for betrayal." In a suspended silence, Ragnar turned to Gudrun. "May Odin ensure we do not regret this choice." The seer distributed the bones, Thurisaz, Hagalaz, and Manaz. Ragnar drew first. Thurisaz, the rune of conflict, held its place. War remained inevitable. Björn drew the second. Hagalaz, the rune of chaos, foretold disorder and loss. Harald drew the last. Manaz, the rune of humanity, symbol of exchange and trust. A murmur ran through the hall. The alliance would come at a cost, but the cohesion of men would prevail. Ragnar, after a long gaze at the torchlit shadows, struck the table with his fist. "So be it!" The horns clashed again. The feast, transformed by the runes, continued in a blend of joy and caution. Alliances were forged with formal gestures. Harold Red Eyes received a ring engraved with the symbol of Ansuz, and Gudmund a chest of gold coins sealed with the rune of Awaz, a pledge of a viable journey. As the music resumed, more measured, the guests raised their horns to celebrate not only victory, but the promise of a new pact. The meal ended in a rumble of expectation. The dancers' steps grew more hesitant, as if each sensed that these oaths, sealed in joy, would soon be tested. When the last torches went out and shadows reclaimed the hall, Ragnar, Lagertha, and Gudrun remained alone before the great closed door. The king placed a hand on the shield maiden's shoulder. "This feast unites us today, but only our deeds will shape our future," he murmured. The seer added in a low voice, "The runes have spoken. War and betrayal will dance around your steps. May Sawillo's light guide your blades." Thus concluded the feast where fates were sealed. In the fading torchlight, beneath the frost of runes and the warmth of alliances, Ragnar Lodbrok vowed to carry his name high and defy the shadows to come. Chapter 5. Fall and Immortality. The treacherous invitation of King Aella. The sun was sinking on the horizon, casting a purple veil over the calm waters of the North Sea, when King Aella's messenger appeared on the shore. His cloak was damp with dew, and the short sword at his belt clinked against his side with a sharp sound. He carried a parchment scroll sealed with a crest bearing a three-branched fleur-de-lis, the symbol of the Daira crown, at the edge of Northumbria. Around his wrist, a worn leather bracelet testified to a long journey from the fortress of Opherwich, where Aella held his palace of stone and torches. Ragnar Lodbrok, still haloed by the memory of the feast where fates were sealed, stood at the center of his camp, his chest struck by the evening shivers. The Drakkars, lined up beneath the cliff, seemed to stand silent watch, their silver-carved prows ready to answer any command. At his side, Lagertha, a slender figure draped in an ermine cloak, scanned the horizon as if awaiting the shadow of an invisible enemy. Björn, his brow grave, adjusted his arrowheads. Ketil Flatnose, his axe resting against a stone anvil, watched the messenger wordlessly, ready to spring at the slightest suspicious move. Silence hung for a few seconds before Ragnar advanced with an imperial step. He took the missive, broke the seal with a sharp motion, and unrolled the parchment with his broad, nervous hands. The first words appeared before his eyes. "To Ragnar Lodbrok, Lord of the Drakkars and Scourge of the West, let peace be woven between our peoples. I invite you to my palace in Eoferwick to conclude a non-aggression and trade agreement under the guarantee of my royal word. Grant me the honor of your presence at dawn on the third day after receiving this message." The words seemed to flow through the air like a delicious venom. Ragnar narrowed his eyes, feeling tension grip his stomach. He folded the parchment, his knuckles whitening under the pressure. "Aella summons me," he declared aloud, his voice echoing against the rocks. "He offers peace and trade, but I sense steel beneath his words." Lagertha stepped forward, bringing her nose close to the parchment to inhale its scent of soot and ink. "The kings of Northumbria are known for their duplicity," she said gravely. "Do you remember the carved stone in York, where Viking chiefs were slain during a similar feast? She gestured toward Ketil, whose brows furrowed. Ketil cracked his calloused knuckles and nodded. Aella has a reputation as a merciless butcher. This false treaty feels more like a mousetrap planned to capture the lion. Björn, who had remained in the background, placed a hand on Ragnar's shoulder. Brother, your sense of honor urges you to trust a king's word, but recall the runes of betrayal. Ragnar, however, raised his head, his gaze bathed in an icy gleam. I will not go without taking precautions, he affirmed. I will send 3 hostages of my blood and 3 Drakkars as pledges before the city gates, and I will demand his written guarantee of my safety and that of my men. His companions nodded slowly. Even Lagertha, guardian of his heart and sword, recognized the wisdom of such caution. Let him carve his promise in stone, at least, she suggested, and let me keep my shield raised at every step. I am witness to his oath. Ragnar nodded and summoned the messenger. Transcribe my conditions and carry them to Aella with my greetings. Tell him I want to see his parchment-sealed peace with as much fervor as my Drakkars sealed Paris in fire and smoke. The messenger bowed, collected the response parchment, and departed, his boots sinking into the wet sand. As he vanished behind the cliffs, the wind's breath raised a mournful murmur among the gulls perched on the masts. Ketil Flatnose sighed, May Odin's ravens not be the only ones to predict the outcome of this night. Ragnar turned to Gudrun, who stood in the shadow of a rock, her black veils floating like raven wings. What do your runes say? He asked. The seer stepped forward, drawing from her satchel a set of runic bones, which she scattered on a wooden board. In the flickering torchlight, she studied the signs, her brow furrowing. Hagalaz, the hail of chaos, stood upright. Thurasaz, the clash and unstoppable force, appeared. Manaz, humanity and alliances, lay inverted. She raised her eyes, her gray voice vibrating. The runes speak of imminent chaos. A storm of betrayal rises. Aella does not seal a pact of friendship, but a trap woven in the shadows. Manaz inverted means the agreement will shatter the brotherhood of hearts, and none will emerge unscathed from this meeting. Ragnar's heart tightened. He felt the echoes of the chasm from his black dreams resonate within him. Yet he had to make a decision. The stakes were too great to back down. If Aella trembled before his fleet, a single speck of Northumbrian dust could set all of England ablaze. The fragile balance, after so much blood spilled, would tolerate neither passivity nor excessive honor. He announced in a clear voice, We will depart at dawn with the 3 hostages under the guard of my sister Theri, and my Drakkars moored before the palace. Let every man be ready, armor polished, helm gleaming, sword sharpened, and let no one set foot in the city without express permission. Lagertha placed a hand on his wrist. We will be with you, Ragnar, in the feast hall. My axe will rest beside your horn, and my shield will not leave you. Björn nodded. Though the runes weep of imminent chaos, our duty is to face it standing. Thus, beneath the trembling torches, Ragnar Lodbrok sealed the treacherous invitation of King Aella. The camp prepared for a journey where honor would consume betrayal, and where the legend of the Son of the Mists would face its darkest trial. The next day, at the dawn of the 3rd day, the Viking fleet would set sail, not to conquer a port, but to confront the broken oath of a king blinded by fear and hatred. At the bottom of the serpent pit, the crenellated gates of Eoforwick's palace slammed shut with a metallic crash, cutting Ragnar Lodbrok off from the last rays of the setting sun. Inside the great hall, the torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the masked faces of the Northumbrian guards. Aella, the king worn by years and fear of the Vikings, rose from his stone throne, his royal toga brushing the blood-painted floor. "You have accepted my conditions," he declared in an eerily calm voice, "and today I offer you the promised hospitality." A murmur ran through the assembly. The masked guests bowed, concealing their daggers in the folds of their cloaks. Ragnar was then led, wrists bound in chains, through a narrow corridor where the smell of damp stone mingled with the acrid scent of tallow. The torches, fixed in iron braziers, cast a blazing glow on the walls, revealing frescoes depicting Eoforwick's ancestors. With each step, his chains clinked like an unpredictable knell, a sinister echo of the fate awaiting him. He met Lagertha's gaze as she was forcibly led to his right, her brows furrowed, her face hard and determined. "Hold fast, my king," she whispered softly. "I will return for you." They emerged at last into the inner courtyard, paved with smooth slabs and bordered by arcades. At its center, carved into the rock, gaped a black pit, wider than a well and several cubits deep. Its floor writhed with a mass of serpents, their pearly bodies moving in an endless hiss, slithering over one another. Vipers with rustling scales, adders with merciless eyes, each seemed to await the flesh that would one day fall into this gaping maw. Ragnar felt his blood freeze, but he raised his chin, the steel of his will cutting through fear. Without a word, Aella approached the pit's edge, brandishing a sculpted golden goblet. He drained it in one gulp, as if sealing a tacit pact, then declared, "Here is the reward for your trust. Welcome to the serpent pit. If by dawn you have not emerged alive, nothing will save you from oblivion." In response, Ragnar turned his head toward his brother Björn and the seer Gudrun, watching from a high gallery. They raised their hands, forming an X of compassion and defiance. In their eyes burned the promise of inevitable vengeance. A soldier grimaced, seized Ragnar by the armpits, and pushed him forward. The warrior felt his feet slip on the edge, then lost his footing. With a muffled crash, he fell, hurled downward. The wind hissed in his ears as the torchlight faded, universal, until only the green darkness of scales remained. Then the world became whispers, slitherings, and snaps. The serpents parted for a moment, forming a moving circle, before closing in on him. The bare flesh of his chest first touched a sleek black serpent, at least a meter long, its triangular head sliding across his torso, grazing his ribs like a cold wind. Ragnar let out a groan, seized the creature with a firm hand, and slammed it against the rock in a crack that echoed like a funereal gong. The impact sent droplets of serpentine blood onto his forearms. The sharp, burning scent of iron seized him. He kicked another reptile, which broke a golden ring still clinging to his finger, sending it into the shadows. Each clash of steel against scale was a challenge thrown at the night, and each thwarted bite. a surge of adrenaline pulsing through his veins. Yet the pit was not merely a battlefield, it was a ritual of suffering. Ragnar felt cold stone slabs beneath his knees, learning in passing that the pit was, in truth, an altar dedicated to a forgotten deity, a ceremonial judgment where human blood fed a cult buried beneath the earth. He discerned, amid the chaos of serpentine bodies, the crest of a symbol carved into the stone, a circle of broken angles, an echo of ancient magic designed to make flesh tremble. But his mind was no prey. He focused his rage, leaned on the short axe from Ketil, hidden at his belt, and crushed a serpent skull with a single sharp blow. The crack echoed up to Aella's stands. Panting, Ragnar felt their coils loosen, fruits of a magical necklace forged by Thora and sanctified by Gudrun. As he tore off the last ring, invoking the rune of strength, Uruz, etched in the pupil of his gaze, a vibration coursed through the pit. The serpents recoiled, as if moved by instinctive respect. Standing again, his lacerated body streaming with a mix of oil and blood, he seized a serpent pressed against his thigh and, with an explosion of strength, hurled it downward with a thunderous roar. Above, the crowd held its breath. Aella, his face pale, stepped back, struck by the echo of Viking power. Ragnar, muscles aflame and soul honed, finally hauled himself out of the pit in a single motion, climbing the edge like a predator emerging from the shadows. The ground was littered with broken scales and serpent corpses, a living tapestry smothered by axe and human will. When his feet touched the cold stone, a silence as heavy as death struck the hall. Ragnar wiped the sweat and blood from his forehead and, in a surge of defiance, raised his axe toward Aella. "You wanted me to drown in fear? I have resurfaced, triumphant over your shadows." His voice resounded metallic, like the hum of a sword on an anvil. He took a step toward the throne, his footsteps echoing like a final judgment. Aella stepped aside. Fear and shame traced cracks across his features, a world burned by duplicity. Before the king could order any defense, Ragnar raised his hand. "I give your life to this pit," he proclaimed. With a circular motion, he sliced the air, and a final slithering serpent broke under the blade like a shattered spell. The guards recoiled, horrified, while Ragnar, dominating the pit's edge, let his weapon fall. The clink of steel on stone sealed his sentence. Aella, pale and trembling, fell to his knees. The masked violins fell silent. The prey were already prey when Ragnar descended from his platform. He approached the king with measured steps, the twilight of shadow giving way to the clarity of a new dawn. He seized Eoforwick's scepter, tore it from Aella's hand, and cast it into the pit, where it fell among the reptilian corpses. "Your crown is viler than a scale," he declared. Then, turning his back, he walked to the door, leaving Aella drunk with terror in a palace now stripped of its power. Outside, Björn and Lagertha awaited him, their gazes blending admiration and relief. Gudrun at the entrance recited an incantation that sealed the fate. "To he who defies shadows and is born of the storm, one path of shadows closes and a road of glory opens." Ragnar, his face marked by sweat and victory, blew into his horn. The rich, vibrant sound split the air, calling his men to rally at his side. Thus ended the trial of the Serpent Pit. In stone and blood, Ragnar Lodbrok unearthed his destiny from the shadows, striking with a single axe the seal of his immortality. From man to eternal legend. When Ragnar set foot on Kattegat's shore for the last time, at the dawn of a day bathed in stark light, the world suddenly seemed too small to contain his triumph. The air heavy with the iodized. After his final breath, a tumulus was raised, covered with yews and spears. At its summit, a black granite stele was engraved with his exploits. Skalds traveled the world to sing the legend of Ragnar Lodbrok. In evening gatherings his words were recited. In war schools his tactics were studied. In forges his runes were imitated. 1,000 years later, the sea still carries his name on the lips of sailors, and sleeping children imagine, to the song of the wind, the flight of Odin's ravens, heralding the coming of a king of storms. Thus, from man to eternal legend, Ragnar Lodbrok crossed the boundary of memory to become the living myth that never dies. Thus ends the epic of Ragnar Lodbrok, this man born of mists and forged by iron. From his first steps on Kattegat's icy pebbles to the glowing red walls of Paris, from his runic vigils to the pit where destiny itself tried to swallow him, he always responded with courage and cunning, surrounded by loyal companions, Lagertha, guardian of his heart, Björn, brother of his soul, Thora, forger of his blade, Ketil, herald of his apprenticeship, and Gudrun, keeper of omens. He turned every challenge into triumph. A conquering king, then a craftsman of peace, his legend rests not only on the raised axe or the tattooed rune, but on the strength of his character, indomitable honor, strategic intelligence, shared loyalty, and profound humanity. Cast into the serpent pit, he emerged greater than ever, cementing his name in human memory as a hero, both terrifying and inspiring. Ragnar Lodbrok remains even today the archetype of the warrior poet, a being of paradoxes, terrible in war, generous in peace, mortal in body, immortal in renown. When the wind sings through the sails and Odin's ravens cross the sky, it is his shadow we believe we glimpse, perpetually sustaining the legend of a man who, by uniting axe and rune, rose to the gates of myth. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through history. I hope this tale has brought you peace and wonder. Don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories to guide you into a serene sleep. Take care and see you soon.